Welcome to training module on Standard 3. My name is Roman Polachenko. I'm Assurance Manager at SBP and I will guide you through the Standard 3 version 2. So this is the accreditation standard. It applies to certification bodies. It's also relevant for accreditation body as they use the accreditation criteria in their oversight process. This model is mandatory for certification bodies, accreditation bodies, as well as peer reviewers. It is optional for certificate holders. So certificate holders, they could benefit from this knowledge so that you know what to expect during the certification audits. However, it can be easily skipped. So other standards 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6 apply to certificate holders. Standard 3 applies to certification bodies. In this session, I will give you a detailed overview of Standard 3 version 2, its purpose and contents. I will focus on indicators that are new or revised and might require more time to implement. So let's check it. SBP has designed a certification scheme that relies on third-party, independent certification process carried out by accredited certification bodies. SBP Standard 3 sets out the requirements that certification bodies must follow when assessing the conformity and compliance of organizations against SBP standards. These requirements are additional to the requirements of ISO 17065. SBP Standard 3 defines the requirements to be followed during the key stages of the certification process, including preparing and conducting evaluations, evaluation compliance, handling non-conformances, certification decisions, issuing and managing certificates. Section 1 is about eligibility requirements for certification bodies. There were no changes made in this section compared to version 1. Some wording was improved, however. The certification body shall hold SBP accreditation in accordance with 17065. Certification body shall also implement all applicable requirements of SBP Standard 3, including the scope of accreditation for SBP Standard 1 and 2 for the scope SBP feedstock sourcing, and SBP Standard 4 for scope SBP chain of custody. Certification body shall hold at least one of the following accreditation: Forest Stewardship Council and/or Program for Endorsement of Forest Certification, PFC, and/or Sustainable Forest Initiative, SFI. The forest management or chain of custody scope of the CB's FSC or PFC or SFI accreditations shall be equivalent to the applicable scope of their SBP accreditation. This also includes the geographical scope of the accreditations. For chain of custody, SBP audits chain of custody accreditation from FSC or PFC is sufficient. However, at the moment, all of the accredited certification bodies, they also do audits and certification of the biomass producers with the supply-based evaluations, and that's why they all need to have also the forest management accreditation from a FSC, PFC, or SFI. Section 2 is about certification agreement. No changes compared to previous requirements here. I will not spend time on this section. CBs can just review the standard itself and make sure the certification contracts are aligned. Section 3 is resource requirements. CBs shall employ or have access to sufficient human and technical resources and manage all certification activities necessary to consistently meet requirements of this standard, including prescribed timeliness and provide prompt and effective service to all clients. The key performance indicators for this would include quality of audit, timeliness, and accuracy of reporting. Also, stakeholder feedback. The CB shall require auditors and technical experts to sign a written agreement to which they commit themselves to comply with applicable policies and implement processes as defined by the certification body and SBP. The agreement shall address aspects related to confidentiality and impartiality and shall require the auditors and technical experts to notify a certification body if any existing or prior relationship with any organization they may be assigned to evaluate. The CB shall ensure and be able to demonstrate that personnel have appropriate competencies relevant to their assigned certification activities, such as application review, auditing, granting of certification, monitoring of auditors. CB shall identify training needs and shall offer or provide access to specific training to ensure its auditors, technical experts, and other people involved in certification activities are competent for the functions they perform. Finally, the CB shall ensure that each person involved clearly understands their duties, responsibilities, and authorities. Next, section 4 is about auditors, their qualifications, trainings, selection, and performance monitoring. Certification bodies shall ensure that auditors are qualified and maintain their qualification for conducting evaluations according to at least one of the following. For evaluation against SBP Standards 1 and 2 and related documents, they need to have FSC Forest Management or PFC endorsed Forest Management Standard qualification. For all other SBP standards, there needs to be FSC or PFC endorsed chain of custody accreditation. For qualification to evaluate conformance against SBP Standards 1 and 2 and related documents, auditor shall have tertiary education in relevant discipline, for example, forest or other natural resource management and or labor social issues, and 3 years of professional experience relevant to the scope of evaluation. Or they can have secondary education in relevant discipline and 5 years of professional experience related to the scope of evaluation. Please note that auditors shall be qualified for specific geographical scopes they have experience for. A bit later, we will also check the requirements related to composition of evaluation teams to ensure their overall geographical qualification. For qualification to evaluate conformance against Standard 6, auditors shall have minimum 2 years experience in biomass or biofuel life cycle assessment calculations of energy and carbon balances and be knowledgeable of the methodology relevant to the scope of evaluation. Auditors shall be registered in audit portal. SBP makes sure that only auditors who successfully pass all mandatory trainings are authorized. For maintaining their qualification, the CB shall ensure that auditor has performed a minimum of 3 SBP external audits in the previous 12 months. This refers to evaluations of any type in any country. More requirements to auditors include the obligation to participate in all SBP trainings and to stay up to date with the changes in SBP system. Certification bodies, SBP Program Manager receives regular updates about training program as well as changes in technical requirements, for example, issuance of a new normative interpretation. The CB needs to have a system for selection and authorization of auditors to ensure that only qualified and competent auditors are used. CB shall also have a documented process for monitoring competence and performance of all persons involved. Certification bodies shall also periodically evaluate the performance of each auditor on-site at an evaluation relevant to the scope of their authorization. The frequency of on-site evaluation or witness audit shall be based on need determined from all monitoring information available, but shall not exceed 3 years. Witness audits can be combined with audits for other certification schemes if the scope is relevant for evaluating their performance for the full scope of SBP evaluation authorization. Section 5 is about subcontracting. Subcontracting SBP certification activities to third parties. Certification body shall have a legally enforceable agreement for the arrangements it has with each body that provides subcontracted services, which shall include at minimum confidentiality requirements and the identification and avoidance of conflict of interest. The legally enforceable agreement shall include that the subcontracted organization shall not make any claims which imply that they are accredited, describe their services as being in association with the accredited CB and include a link to the certification body's website on its website where available. Key certification activities shall not be subcontracted. These include policy formulation and approval, process and procedure development and approval, initial assessment of competence, approval of technical personnel as subcontractors, control of the monitoring process, contract review including technical review of applications and determining the technical requirements for certification activity, certification decision making including technical review of evaluation tasks. The CB shall have a process for approval and monitoring of all bodies that provide subcontracted services used for certification activities and shall ensure that records of the competence of all personnel involved in certification activities are maintained. Please note that where certification body engages individuals or employees of other organizations to provide additional resources or expertise, these individuals do not constitute subcontracting, provided they are individually contracted to operate under the CB's management system. Section 6 is about planning evaluation activities. Certification body shall provide applicants with all the necessary information on the certification process and CB certification requirements. When receiving an application for certification, CB shall obtain all the necessary information to plan and conduct the certification process in accordance with applicable SBP certification requirements. CB needs to register applicant in audit portal. Indicators 6.5 to 6.11 present requirements for selection and assigning auditor teams. Most importantly, CB shall have process in place for selecting and appointing an evaluation team, including evaluation team leader and technical experts as necessary. They need to consider the competence needed to achieve the objective of the evaluation and requirements for impartiality. The process shall follow the relevant requirements of ISO 19011. It is important that persons responsible for selecting auditor teams, for example so-called audit task managers, get very familiar with these requirements and follow them. Standard 3 version 2 does have more strict requirements for determination of audit time. It is sometimes also called the level of effort. The CB shall have documented procedures for determining evaluation time. For each client, CB shall determine the time needed to accomplish a complete and effective evaluation of the client's entire scope of certification. This shall be documented. In determining the evaluation time, the CB shall consider at least the following: the requirements of the relevant SBP standards, for example, how many SBP standards and instruction documents apply, complexity of the client and its management system, technological context, any subcontracting of any activities, the results of any prior evaluations, size and number of sites and their geographical locations, the risks associated with the products, processes, or activities of the organization. Please note that time spent traveling to and from audited sites shall not be included in the calculation of the duration of the evaluation time. The duration of evaluation of BP, biomass producer, shall be minimum 8 auditing hours, and for trader shall be minimum 4 hours, not including time spent traveling between audited sites. In case the duration of an evaluation of BP is less than 8 hours, CB shall justify the reduction. Finally, there are now a bit more detailed requirements for sampling. First of all, the CB shall have a documented sampling procedure taking into account intensity, scale, and risk. If the evaluation includes assessment against multiple certification schemes or assessment of different legal entities under common ownership that are being evaluated simultaneously, the evaluation planning shall ensure sufficient time on site for evaluation of each legal entity and each system requirements to provide confidence in the SBP certification. Although the same evidence may be relevant for more than one legal entity, planning shall ensure adequate on-site evaluation to provide confidence in the certification decision for each legal entity. The CB shall consider logistics sites as temporary sites, and thus these sites do not need to be included in the sample pool. CB shall consider storage sites as permanent sites, and thus these sites shall be included in the sample pool, unless the storage size has not been used in the previous year to the evaluation. When SBP scope includes storage, logistics, and/or port facilities, CB shall categorize the sites and, where relevant, justify the sampling methodology in their public summary report. When evaluation of risk ratings or risk management measures need to take place at the forest management level or supplier level, the CB shall calculate the sample to be evaluated using the formula as follows. It is the square root from the number of sourcing areas or suppliers. If both numbers are applicable, the larger number shall prevail. And in case of initial or re-evaluations, this number shall be multiplied by 0.8. And in case of surveillance evaluations, it can be multiplied by 0.6. So example calculation could be that the two sawmills supply a pellet mill, and each of the two sawmills they buy from 100 sourcing areas. The sample should be calculated from 200 sourcing areas, not from just two sawmills. So if that would be the initial evaluation, then we would need to take the square root from 200 and multiply it by 0.8. That would give the sample for the audit. Section 7 includes requirements for initial and re-evaluation audits. This is sometimes also called main assessments or reassessments. When registering new applicants in the audit portal, certification body shall request applicants to disclose whether they are a current or previous participant of another certification scheme, and also whether they had a different legal form or name in the past 12 months. They need to check that other certification scheme certificate lists for the name of the applicant or former name within the past 12 months. They also need to perform a so-called customer due diligence or know your customer check, in particular for companies with a limited trading history, to bring to the attention of SBP any applicants seeking recertification who were previously found to be in non-conformance with the requirements, to inform SBP about participation in another certification scheme. This requirement was inspired by RED 2. It is useful especially in light of cases where FSC certificates were terminated and they have a special so-called blacklist of companies where companies may not achieve FSC certification anymore. So these cases should be brought to SBP's attention and shall be analyzed. The important requirement is that initial evaluation shall always be conducted on-site, even for traders without physical possession. The certification body shall make a certification decision within 12 months from initial evaluation. Otherwise, certification body shall perform a full on-site re-evaluation again. Special attention should be given to readiness of monitoring systems, including mass balance management and following the requirements for processing residues and post-consumer feedstock sourcing. In the next slide, we will see the process of auditing stakeholder engagement. Working with stakeholders have changed compared to the previous version of the standard. Previously, certification body was required to conduct a stakeholder consultation 30 days prior to the assessment by sending out emails to relevant stakeholders. Or they could also reach them via not just email, via phone, physical meetings, but the important requirement was to contact them 30 days prior to assessment. This process wasn't effective and often simply resulted in stakeholder fatigue. Standard version 2 applies a smarter approach to the verification of stakeholder engagement. Let's check the revised requirements. Irrespective of the presence of the supply-based evaluation and for initial evaluations and re-evaluations, certification body shall provide the following information to SBP at least 1 month prior to the start of evaluation for posting on SBP website. This includes name and locations of the entity to be assessed, scheduled date of the evaluation, and contact details for both the company and the certification body. The CB shall then review available stakeholder comments for evidence of conformance or potential non-conformances with relevant requirements before evaluation takes place. In addition to other available sources of information, this would also require asking company to submit records related to their stakeholder engagement plan. So the certification body doesn't need to inform stakeholders in advance and do this mechanical step, but rather to evaluate through various sources of information, including if anything came through the SBP website or through reviewing certificate holders or applicant stakeholder engagement plan, and based on that making their assessment. CB information gathering shall include any information provided by SBP, as I said already, stakeholder engagement plan for client, but then of course there is possible to actively collect stakeholder comments when it's linked to specific questions and risks identified in the supplier-based evaluation. So the latter is not a default action anymore, but will be the subject to auditor team planning and evaluation. So if there is like a certain stakeholders which may have a special opinion about the risk management measures, for example, then it makes sense for auditor team to contact them in advance of audit and consult. We believe that such approach will reduce the so-called spamming of stakeholders and will allow more effective targeted process. The results of the information gathering shall inform the evaluation topics, intensity, and sample size. Information about evaluation of stakeholder engagement is also, of course, included in the public summary report. Section 8 is about non-conformances. No changes occurred compared to the version 1 of the standard. However, I would like to remind you that RED 2 bridging document includes different non-conformance rules, and this should be followed when auditing RED 2 part of the technical scope. As we already know, all SBP public reports may only be completed using Audit Portal. In order to improve the visibility and monitoring, we introduced a new requirement that audit closing meeting date shall be entered into the Audit Portal within 5 days of the closing meeting. This will allow SBP Secretariat to monitor the audit progress and timeliness more efficiently. There is also a requirement for maximum period for the public summary report preparation, and it remains 90 days. So within 90 days from the closing meeting, the public summary report needs to be closed and uploaded in the Audit Portal. There is also a general requirement which states that CB shall ensure that Audit Portal records stay up to date. Examples of issues include situations where CB complete the audit but do not register this in Audit Portal, or if audit waiver is approved by the CB but Audit Portal is again not updated and the SBP Secretariat is not aware of the status of this audit. Section 10 of the standard is about peer review. The peer review is a step of certification process which requires a review of the certification decision by independent expert. Prior to making a certification decision, CB shall submit a draft evaluation report to a formal peer review process for the following evaluation scope. So it needs to be initial or a re-evaluation that includes the supplier-based evaluation, any evaluations that include extension scope of the supplier-based evaluation, and also any evaluations of a suspended certificate with the supplier-based evaluation in the scope for consideration of reinstatement of certification. So, of course, there is also like one exception that CB may apply to SBP to waive the peer review, where this would not affect the quality of the evaluation or reporting process. For example, when the suspension of such certificate resulted from non-payment of CB fee. The peer review is to be conducted after the CB considers that a positive certification decision can be made. As such, the peer review does not qualify as meeting the requirements of a technical review and is done in addition to or separately from that. The CB's evaluation report shall be reviewed by at least one independent peer reviewer selected from the list of approved peer reviewers published on the SBP website. At the moment in spring 2023, there were 4 approved peer reviewers available. Selected peer reviewer shall not have been otherwise contracted by the CB during the last 2 years. For example, peer reviewer could not work as a contractor auditor for the CB. The CB shall require that peer reviewer disclose any prior association with the client and be subject to the same requirements related to conflict of interest and confidentiality as other CB personnel with influence on the certification decision. In other words, the peer reviewer should not have worked with the specific company in the role of consultant or employee, for example. Process-wise, peer reviewer is expected to review the draft public summary report and supply-based report if necessary. Peer reviewer may comment on any aspect of the certification decision process, including but not limited to resources requirements and process requirements. Usually, the key focus of the peer review is the implementation by the biomass producer of the supply-based evaluation and the CB's process to evaluate it. SBP is planning to provide separate training to peer reviewers to calibrate the focus areas and priorities. The peer review process is integrated into the audit portal, where a short checklist is kept to document the review process, including any remarks raised by the peer reviewer and CB responses. Section 11 is a new section. It specifies requirements for decision making. The certification body retains authority and responsibility for all certification decisions. If subcontractor is used, then CB should keep the certification decision function to itself. CB shall assign a decision-making entity separate from the evaluation process to make certification decisions. Certification decision-making entity should meet requirements for qualification, experience, and impartiality, comprise individuals without conflict of interest, especially financial or commercial, exclude those involved in the evaluation process, such as team leaders, auditors, or technical experts. Certification decisions are based on the evidence in the evaluation report, corrective actions, peer review conclusions, and other relevant evaluation results. Certification bodies should make certification decisions within a month after the evaluation closing meeting. It should also communicate certification decision to the client after the evaluation. Section 12 is about SBP certificates. This is very straightforward technical section. We'll not go into details. Certification bodies can check it and make sure that their templates for certificates are aligned. Section 13. It provides requirements for surveillance audits. More detailed requirements on what steps to take when to do the surveillance or annual audits. So surveillance audit is SBP certification process, one of the steps where it's a periodic review conducted by the CB to ensure that certified organizations continue to meet applicable SBP standards. Primary objective is to monitor the ongoing compliance and effectiveness of the organization's sustainability practices and management systems for meeting SBP standards. During surveillance audit, auditors assess various elements such as organization's documentation, operational practices, management commitment, stakeholder engagement, accounting records, and the impact of any changes made since the last audit. The audit's result can lead to the maintenance, suspension, or withdrawal of the certification, depending on whether the organization continues to meet SBP requirements. Generally, on-site element of surveillance evaluation shall be completed before the end of the anniversary month of the initial evaluation on-site closing meeting. So if initial evaluation closing meeting was, let's say, in January, then the surveillance audit shall be completed before the January of the next year, and so on. CBs may request from the SBP Secretariat to use alternative anniversary month for specific certificate holder, for example, where this facilitates efficient evaluation planning and scheduling. Surveillance evaluations shall follow clear documented procedures which address the elements specified in this standard and shall include the following elements. Evaluation of the client's continued conformance with all conditions and subsequent corrective actions in which certification is based. Review of any complaints or allegations of non-conformance with any aspect of the applicable standards. Evaluation of an adequate and appropriate sample of sites and records. An interview with a sufficient number of affected stakeholders in order to verify that management systems are working effectively and consistently under the full range of conditions present in the area under evaluation. Remote evaluations may be carried out without the need for on-site visit for operations that do not take physical possession of the SBP certified feedstock or biomass in their own or rented facilities and do not alter, store, or repackage the product. Remote evaluations are only applicable for standards 4, 5, and 6 evaluations, not for evaluations of standards 1 and 2. Certification bodies will have procedures for determining whether a surveillance evaluation against standard 4, 5, or 6 is conducted remotely or conducted on-site. Remote evaluations may have reduced duration for operations that have not produced, labeled, or sold any biomass with SBP claims since the previous audit. In cases that biomass has been produced, in cases where no biomass has been produced, labeled, or sold with SBP claim since the last audit, CB may waive for surveillance evaluation. So requirements in this regard to waive have not changed compared to the version 1 of the standard, and more detailed requirements can be found in the respective section of the standard version 2. Section 13, surveillance evaluations, also includes requirements what to audit specifically for standards 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6. So for standards 1 and 2, auditors should review the supply-based evaluation with focus on changes, should review operational plans for the next 12 months, check feedstock records and records of risk assessments and risk management measures. When auditing standards 4, 5, and 6, they should additionally cover review of chain of custody system, again with focus on changes, inventory records, input-outputs documentation, mass balance calculations, sample of records to trace outputs back to inputs to verify reconciliation, and how data is entered into the DTS system, including accuracy of the SAR report, and when applicable for standard 6, greenhouse gas emission calculations and their accuracy. And some more requirements. Section 14 is about certification termination, scope, reduction, suspension. Section 15 is about complaints and appeals procedure, and Annex 1 is about certificate transfer. Again, I will not start repeating standard requirements here. Certification bodies can just read these sections and make sure that your management systems are updated and aligned. We reached the end of module about Standard 3. I hope it provided a good overview of the Standard 3 version 2. SBP team is always open to receive questions and clarification requests from the certification bodies. We're starting with this new version of the standard. There's going to be many sessions of calibration and potentially additional training modules and sessions to dive deeper in some of the aspects of this standard. Thank you.